I want to welcome everybody to the second of my video series on poker psych principles. The topic for today's presentation will be on finding balance in poker and in life. So basically this is about finding a work-life balance with an emphasis on whether or not if your poker is your job and how you can find a balance between putting in all those hours that are necessary to be a professional poker player and also be able to devote the necessary time to make the rest of your life run smoothly. So, how do you usually feel at the end of a typical day? Do you feel good about what you've accomplished throughout the day? Do you feel upbeat? Do you feel as if you've gotten a lot accomplished? Or do you kind of feel like this guy here, where you're under a cloud, you're steaming, you're mad, and you find yourself feeling that way a pretty high percentage of the time? What about at the end of the week? Everybody, there's whole movies and songs about everybody, living for the weekend, but are you generally satisfied with what you've gotten accomplished at the end of a week, or are you completely burnt out, worn out, exhausted, dreading the idea that you only have like 2 days off before you have to, go back to the office? And again, poker, if poker is your job, it's a lot different than just for being a 9-to-5 office worker. But do you often find yourself feeling just completely wrecked after you've been playing for a couple of days? And finally,
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
Have you ever felt this way, just sort of in general about your life? Just furious, angry, pissed off, nothing's going your way, everything's out of whack, and everything's been out of whack for about as long as you can remember now. If any of these previous slides are familiar to you, and not just every once in a while, because I think everybody can relate to being burnt out, after a really long grind, or being furious at the end of a day that didn't go particularly well. But if any of those previous slides seem familiar to you because you experience them a hefty percentage of the time, like 75% of the time or more, you feel just generally pissed off and burned out and angry about how things are going, then you might want to consider that your life is out of balance in some fashion. And what that means is that, or why that's important, is that in order for you to perform optimally in any part of your life, in poker, in another job, in keeping your relationships running smoothly, and just in feeling well physically and mentally, in order for that to happen, it's important for you to have some kind of balance in your life. And that's what this presentation is going to focus on. So we're going to discuss developing and maintaining an appropriate balance in poker and in life, which should not only help you improve your poker game, because when you feel better, when you're mentally refreshed and not, exhausted and burned out and angry, you're going to play better poker. You're going to be able to play your A game. But just as important, and I think something that a lot of times gets left out of the equation, is the fact that you might actually be able to enjoy yourself. A lot of people talk about, especially if they pick up poker professionally, that the game is no longer fun anymore because you're 24 tabling in order to, be able to make enough money to live comfortably. And when you're not having fun anymore, when poker is just a grind, when life is just a grind, it's very easy to become burnt out, apathetic, lose motivation, and all of that is what it's ultimately going to end up leading to, is worse performance, which is going to force you to play even more, and it becomes a never-ending spiral where you're not playing optimally, you're not feeling optimal, and life pretty much sucks. Just a brief reintroduction for those who either didn't catch the first video or just want to know in general who I am. My name is Nicole Sargent. I go by Sergeant RJ online. On the last dot there, I am an NVG moderator, news, views, and gossip on the 2+2 poker forums. But the reason why I'm doing this series on poker psych principles is because I do have a background in psych. I have a master's in counseling psych. I'm working on my PhD dissertation in counseling, and I have worked with, a couple dozen clients with a variety of issues, including stuff like being, burnt out and apathetic and just not feeling like they're going anywhere in life in general. And so that's just to give you an idea of my background so that you can decide whether or not you think I'm somebody worth listening to on this topic. The goals for this presentation are to understand life balance and why it's important for optimal functioning, to discuss the signs and symptoms that you might be out of balance, and also to, and probably most importantly, to be able to identify specific measures that you can take to work on establishing a balance in your life and in your poker game if you decide that this is something that you want to work on. And with that in mind,
let's get ready to rumble!
Yeah, obviously this isn't a boxing match, but I just thought that was funny. Alright, we're going to start off, we're going to talk about what is life balance. I mean, this is one of those very sort of new agey psychobabble terms that people just sort of toss around without really stopping to think about what it means. And what it really basically boils down to is the proper prioritization of what most people would classify as work or obligation, and stuff like that would be your job, your career, your coursework if you're still in school, things that you have to take care of on like a day-to-day basis in order to make money or in order to basically live, and then everything else, which most people assume is a secondary priority from, your work or your obligations. And stuff like this includes hobbies, relationships with friends, families, significant others, leisure activities, spiritual growth, basically anything else in your life that isn't work or some form of obligation and the basic physical necessities that you need in order to survive, like eating and sleeping. Everything else falls into, the category that's non-work. And finding a balance between those things that you consider to be obligations and those secondary priorities, which we're going to talk about, really aren't secondary priorities. That's what we mean when we talk about finding a balance in life, finding a balance between your job and the rest of your life, finding a balance between the world of poker and everything else outside of poker. If you place too much emphasis on any one part of your life at the expense of everything else for too long a period of time, it will result in you being out of balance. Now, it's important to notice that caveat that this is something that has to go on for, too long of a period of time. It's really normal to have to focus almost exclusively on one very important thing, at least for a short period of time. If you're a professional poker tournament player, during the World Series of Poker, if that's one of the tournament series you play during the year, then obviously, while that series is going on, you're going to be placing a much higher emphasis on poker than you might during other parts of your life. And that's normal, and that's fine. When it gets to be a problem is when you're focusing on your work or something like that to the exclusion of everything else for a significant period of time. And when that does happen, you start to see the stuff from those first couple slides. You start to see burnout and anger and depression and all that stuff. And that's what we would, when we say your life isn't in balance, that's what we're talking about. Why is it important? I mean, why would you care? Why do you care if you spend 95% of your time on poker and the other 5% of your time on basically just surviving, and all of the rest of it just goes by the wayside? Why should you care? Well, it's important to remember that you only have a finite amount of yourself to give to everything in your life. You only have a finite amount of time, of physical stamina, of mental energy. There's only so much of you to go around. And 99% of people have more than one part of their life that they think is important to them. They have, yes, it's important for you to be good at your career in order for you to make money, but it's also important that, your friendships are there so that you have support in times of need. It's important for your relationships with your family or your significant other to function well, because those things bring you happiness, make it easier for you to go to work in the morning. If all of your mental energy and all of your time is being devoted to your career or to your poker game at the expense of everything else, then all of those other goals that you have for yourself are going to suffer. There's simply no more of you left to give. And when those other parts of your life suffer, you start to see things like you suddenly don't have as many friends anymore. Your family, you're barely in contact with them. You maybe call like once or twice a year. You don't have a significant other, and you would like to. That's why maintaining some sort of balance so that every part of your life that's important to you gets the amount of time and attention that it needs to thrive is so important. Now, this is a pictorial representation of a story that, gets told a lot in psych, in sociology, in mental health fields and stuff like that. But it's really applicable to this particular topic. So what it basically boils down to is you and your life is the jar. And all of the rocks, the big rocks, the little rocks, and the sand, and of course all sand is really, really tiny rocks, all of those represent goals in your life. Things in your life that you would like to focus on. The larger the rock, then the more important or long-term the goal is. Now, as you can see, depending on how you put the rocks into the jar, you're not going to be able to make everything fit. In the representation there, if you spend all of your time focusing on the minutia of your life, the very tiny details, like getting money out of the ATM and running to the grocery store and answering all these emails and checking Twitter and going on 2+2 and posting hand histories. If you spend so much time focusing on the minutia that you don't actually get around to working on the big goals like actually playing poker, you're not going to be able to make everything fit. And that's what this picture represents. And it demonstrates the importance of prioritization, of figuring out when and how you're going to focus on certain things in your life so that you can make everything fit. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how you personally would potentially recognize if your life is out of balance. And a lot of this sort of boils down to what we represented in the first couple slides, where you see the guy with the cloud above his head and the other guy with his head down on the desk with the fire all around because he's burnt out. Common symptoms of improper life balance are things like feeling burnout, which all burnout usually means is that it's usually specifically aimed at your job, and it really just means that you're sick to death of it. You have very little motivation to do anything work-related anymore. So in poker, if you're a poker professional, if you're burnt out on poker, it's going to be very difficult for you to get the necessary motivation to put in the amount of volume that maybe you put in the past, or to spend the time that you used to spend looking over your hand histories and trying to find your leaks and plug them. That's what we would mean by burnout, specifically as it would apply to your poker game. Some other symptoms of life imbalance are, emotional symptoms, depression, anxiety, anger, which you saw in the little cartoon with the guy with the cloud above his head. Apathy, just not caring about anything anymore, and not just about poker, but not even necessarily caring about as much maybe about your physical appearance, about your diet, about going out and meeting with people, hanging out with friends, a feeling of emptiness, fatigue or illness. If you're burnt out enough, if your life is significantly imbalanced, it can actually get bad enough where it impacts you physically. You feel run down and ill. So all of these are potential symptoms of a life out of balance. And what it all basically boils down to is you're not very happy. You feel like your life sucks, and you feel that way even if objectively it looks as if everything's going okay. You're a poker pro. You make your own schedule. You get to sit around in your underwear clicking a button, making tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars playing a game online, but you still feel like your life sucks. That's what we mean when your life is out of balance, and what we would mean when we say that you're burnt out. A quick caveat about life balance is that it's important to take an overview of your entire life. As we already covered, it's very normal to need to devote a lot of your time and energy to only one area of your life for a specific period of time or during a crisis. Obviously, nobody's going to tell you that your life is out of balance if you spend all of your time at the hospital after somebody you love has been in a car accident. That's not what we're talking about here. Same thing, if you're a poker tournament pro and you spend all of your time during the World Series of Poker focusing on your poker game, that's pretty normal. So you need to look at this over the long term in order to determine or get a sense of whether or not your life personally is in or out of balance. Another thing that you want to bear in mind here that's not on the slide is that each person is going to be different in terms of how much time they feel they need to sort of portion out to each particular part of their life. One example might be your physical fitness. Some people are going to feel fine with their level of physical activity if they work out maybe an hour 3 times a week, and they feel perfectly fine, perfectly in balance with that amount of physical activity. Other people may feel like they need to devote, an hour and a half, 5 or 6 times a week in order for them personally to feel as if they've done enough in that part of their life. There is no chart that anybody can give you to say, okay, you need to devote 33.7 hours of your life to work and 26.4 hours to family. It doesn't work that way. It's going to be excuse me. It's going to be slightly different from person to person. So it's really going to be an individual effort on your part to determine which parts of your life you need to spend time on and how much time you need to spend on those particular parts. And just to take a break from me blathering at you, I found a nifty little picture that kind of is again a pictorial representation of trying to maintain your balance in life. You only have so much time, and there's a lot of different things that are important to you. So, how do you go about establishing balance? If you decide that things either aren't in balance or you kind of just want to take some time and focus on this so that you can figure out where you stand as far as your life balance goes. The first thing is that you actually have to make an honest assessment about what's important to you. What are the things that you want to accomplish in life? Short and long-term goals. And when you think about this, it's really important that the goals are your goals and not somebody else's. It's so common when people are talking about things that they want to accomplish in life that they actually include things that aren't that important to them but are important to friends and family, or they feel like should be important to them because that's what is important to somebody else. Not everybody is not the same. something that is important to you might not be important at all to anybody else, and vice versa. Just because your parents think that you need to get a college degree, maybe that's not the way you want to go. I'm not obviously discounting education at all. I'm a giant nerd when it comes to being in school. I'm already in my 30s and I'm still going to school. But that's not the way that everybody should do things. Your goals have to be your goals. If not, then you're going to spend a lot of time and energy focusing on something that you don't really care about. And all that's doing is sucking up time and energy that you could be spending on things that you honestly do care about. So when you make out a list of all your goals, you have to be really honest with yourself, sometimes brutally honest with yourself about what's really important to you, so that you can make time for the things that are important to you and get rid of the stuff that isn't important to you. And after you figure out what all of those goals are, you have to make a list and figure out which ones are the most important, which ones maybe have a time sensitivity component to them. If one of your goals, say, is to get into college, then you obviously have to keep track of deadlines about when you have to apply, when you have to take the GREs or the SATs or whatever. Some goals require a lot more time and energy than others. If one of your goals is to become, a mid-stakes grinder, playing cash online, that's going to take a lot more time and energy than if one of your other, than another goal in your life, which might be to maintain a decent level of physical fitness that requires you to go to the gym 1 hour 4 times a week. That's 4 hours of your week. Obviously, improving your poker game is going to take a lot more than that. So you need to figure out which goals are going to take the most time. And then you have to look at how much time you actually have available and start figuring it out. Okay, I have this much time to devote to this. I have this much time to devote to this. This is something that I need to at least focus on every once in a while, say a relationship with some of your more distant friends. So once a month I need to make sure that I'm keeping in contact with these guys, going out to the bar and hanging out and just catching up. All of that, you need to actually stop and think about what it takes to either make progress on certain goals or maintain the relationships in your life that are important to you. So in order to, not talk just about, it generically, I, wanted to make it more poker specific. And if how can you continue to improve your game, which includes ensuring you put in enough volume to meet all of your financial obligations if you're a poker professional, while also doing all of these other things. And again, these are just some examples. Some of these may be very important to you, like forming and maintaining relationships. For some people, that's not as high a priority. Some people are more introverted, or are very happy with only 2 or 3 very close friends, as opposed to a very wide circle of with a lot of friends. It's completely dependent on what is important to you. Some people are going to have educational goals, others are not. Again, some people put a lot of emphasis on, physical activity. Maybe you have a sport that's one of your hobbies that's, you're very dedicated to and takes, a decent amount of time and practice. Maybe you're prepping to run a marathon. That wouldn't be one of my goals, but if it's one of yours, you need to figure out how to fit that in along with doing all of the necessary work for poker. Putting in a significant amount of volume, doing the necessary hand history reviews, getting feedback from your coach if you have one, or just talking to other grinders who are at about the same level as you or slightly better, so that you can find the leaks in your game and plug them. How do you do that and do everything else? All right. One of the keys to getting your life in balance and keeping it there is scheduling. Now, I know this is somewhat antithetical to people who embrace the poker lifestyle. Part of what is really, really great about being a poker pro is that you get to make your own schedule. You don't have to wake up at 7 o'clock and shower and get in your car and drive for 45 minutes to get into the office, to clock in by 9 o'clock. None of that applies to you. You can set your own schedule. You can go to sleep when you want. You can get up when you want. You can play when you want. Unfortunately, what that sometimes leads to is a complete lack of scheduling in any aspect of somebody's life. And that makes it really, really easy to let some of the things that are goals for you, but that, they kind of take a little bit of work, so you're not 100% motivated to do them all the time. Like maybe work out, maybe, planning out, a healthy diet as opposed to just grabbing whatever you can get on the run. Scheduling is not a dirty word. I know that's the way a lot of people feel about it when they think about a schedule. But if you really seriously want to keep your life in balance or get your life in balance, it's important to carve out specific parts of time for you to say, okay, I'm a little bit lazy about working out. These are the set times that I'm going to work out. I often just get so engrossed in playing that I kind of forget to, go out and just hang out with my friends and have fun. At least once a week, I'm going to do that. Scheduling doesn't have to mean that every second of every part of your day is completely accounted for. It just means that you have to sit down and carve out the time necessary to work on the goals that up until now maybe you haven't been focusing on as much because you've just kind of let them fall by the wayside. Again, as I point out, scheduling, not a dirty word. And one of the great things is that if you are a poker professional, is that you don't have a boss, and it's very easy for you, if you want to make the time for you to do the things you need to do. I think it's really easy to say, well, I'm a poker pro, and in order to make the most money and get better as quickly as possible, I should devote all of my time to playing. If you do that, your game might improve more quickly, but you're doing it at the expense of everything else in your life. And you're often, what happens to a lot of people who dedicate themselves to doing nothing but playing poker day after day, month after month, is after a year or two, yeah, they're really good poker players, but they also are very apathetic now toward the game of poker. They're burnt out. They're good at it, but it's no longer any fun for them. It's just a job, and they're kind of sick of it. And that's when you do see people talking about, I kind of wish I had never gotten into this game. It's just like a job, just like everything else, and it's sucking out my soul. That's what happens when your life is completely out of balance. And it is important to focus on your game if you're a professional, but it's also important to take care of yourself. And that's ultimately what life balance is all about. It's about taking care of every part of your life so that you're taking care of yourself. It's important for you to schedule the time necessary to get regular exercise, to eat properly, to hang out with your friends and have fun, and to schedule some time in where you basically just do nothing. Complete downtime. You watch TV or play video games or just do whatever it is that you like to do that makes you feel re-energized, that you enjoy, that makes you feel like life is worth living again, which if you're completely burnt out, oftentimes people they get to the point where, I'm making enough money, I make my own schedule, but my life still really, really sucks. And I think when you stop and think about it, that's kind of sad, because there are a lot of people out there who would kill to have a job where, they don't necessarily have to leave their home if they don't want to, where they can set their own hours, where they can do their own thing, and yet people who have that in their lives are miserable. That's kind of sad, I think. So it's important to focus also on things that are not poker related so that you get some enjoyment out of life. Go out, have fun, play games, take care of yourself. And there we go. And again, just another little graph of all the things that you often have to balance in life. And in that case, with poker there, that can incorporate any one of those particular things you have to juggle. So it's important to be able to find the time for everything else too. All right, some kind of concrete tips. Make time for real life relationships. A lot of people joke about, the poker community, in general, because it does tend to skew highly toward young males, men who are, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, that general age range. And, a lot of them also have the personality type where they're highly independent or, mathematically inclined and maybe a touch introverted, the geeky, nerdy, Asperger type. That's one of the stereotypes. Even people like that still have a need in their life for personal relationships. Maybe not as strong a need as other people, but it is important, to keep contact with people in your life who are important to you. Because, one of the great things is that if your life is going really well, it's nice to be able to share that with somebody. A second thing that I've touched on, throughout this is getting regular exercise. It's one of those cliches that happens to be true. If your body is functioning well, if you're getting regular exercise, it helps pretty much everything. It helps your physical stamina, which is, I think hugely underrated by some people, and how important it is to actually take care of yourself physically in order to stay at the table for 12, 14, 16 hours at a time. A lot of jokes out there about, a sport like poker where you don't actually have to be in shape. But for those people who have, played long tournament series, they always say that they end up getting very physically drained over the course of playing that many hours a day over that many days consecutively. So if you're in good shape, it's going to help with that. It also, regular exercise helps relieve stress. It helps you sleep better. It's basically just good for you, so you should probably do it. And a final thing is there, that you want to make sure that you take the time to build in is leisure time. Schedule time for yourself to do things that you enjoy. Playing video games, going out with friends, going out clubbing, whatever it is you do for fun. I'm not going to go through the entire list because, again, it's highly personal. But you should be doing something for you that you enjoy at least weekly, if not daily. It doesn't have to be a couple of hours. It can be, a half an hour playing video games or whatever, hanging out, going out with a friend for dinner. You have to eat. You might as well go out and enjoy your meal with somebody. Just make sure you're scheduling time that's leisure time, that's downtime, that's not solely poker centric if poker is your job. It's really easy in the poker world where a lot of stuff is online to just get sucked in where everything is poker related. All your friends are poker related, all your leisure activities are poker related, your job is poker, and that can contribute to, burnout. So find some other things to enjoy too. And one of sort of the last things I want to touch on is that when you're going through your list of goals, it's important for you to be able to objectively figure out if you actually have extra goals that other people have kind of put on you. And this is sort of a prototypical, if you always say yes to everybody. Will you help me move? Yeah, I'll help you move. Will you help me do this? Yeah, sure. I need help with whatever. If you're always the guy that says yes, you might be taking on too much, and that's taking away from some of your other major life goals. So if you're that kind of person, when you're making out your list of priorities, it's going to be very important for you to have a set number of things that you can say yes to, and everything else you're going to have to learn to basically say, I'm full up right now. I don't have any extra time to fit this in. Hit me up in a couple months and maybe. But don't feel bad about saying no. You have to be able to take care of yourself in order for your life to run smoothly. So saying no in that circumstance, it doesn't make you a bad friend. It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you just like everybody else. You don't have infinite time and resources. And if you're giving away a lot of your time to other people, that's less time that you have for what's important to you. And you're going to end up stretched too thin. So some ways that you can free up more time are to, be able to recognize what are truly obligations as opposed to things that you think you need to do but you don't really need to do that you could, get rid of. Eliminate chronic time-wasting activities, checking your email every 3 seconds, checking your Twitter every 5 seconds. If you can kind of cut that down, it will free up some more time. Learning to say no, and, if you've got the money, consider outsourcing, certain errands that, maybe do take up some time that you would like to spend on something else, like running out and grabbing your groceries or whatever. Again, just another little pictorial representation. And finally, if you remember what we talked about earlier in the presentation about being able to make everything fit in your life, if you focus on the things that are most important to you and you spend most of your time focusing on them, you're going to find that the little details will fit into the cracks around it. And you can make everything fit if you properly prioritize all of your goals and you spend more of your time on the bigger, more important things and less of your time on the more minuscule, the details, the less important things. And that's just what that picture represents. In the first picture, not everything fit. In this picture, everything does fit. And finally, again, just a life balance wheel. It's going to look different for everybody. You might need more rest and relaxation time than somebody else. You might need more professional time if you're, developing your game. But it's important that you find time for everything that's important in your life. All right, that concludes this presentation on finding balance in life and poker. I hope you have enjoyed the presentation. Thank you for listening, and I will see you for the third of my poker Psych Principles series coming soon in the future.